Let's look at measurements in questionnaire data collection. So the question wordings are appropriate to minimize bias. So we need to follow certain measurement principles to ensure questions asked represents the variables. Wherever possible, when measuring the variables, when we ask questions, we should use the continuous data measurement scale to measure the responses. A good introduction to the questionnaire is helpful, and the general appearance of the questionnaire is also important to elicit responses. So when data are collected using questionnaire, the questions that are asked should represent the constructs. If the questionnaire is being used to test a theory where structural equation modeling technique could be used, for example, there are two constructs. Each construct is having dimensions or observed variables. For each observed variable, we should have a set of questions. So for the construct A, for its dimensions or the observed variables, we should have a set of questions for each dimension or observed variable. And for the construct B, for its dimensions or observed variables, we should have a set of questions for each observed variable. So there are two parts in the analysis. First part is the measurement part, where data are being obtained, and the structural part is using this data to relate to observed variables, and from observed variables, the structural part is to relate to constructs. When developing a theory, a principal component analysis technique could be used similarly from the questions to find components that are important, and these components becomes observed variables. These components in combination will represent a construct. And for construct A, there could be components, and for construct B, there could be components. So the measurement part are the questions asked and relating them to the components and finding out the components, and the structural part is relating the components to the constructs. Let's look at an example. Let's say we want to look at the relationship between intellectual capital influencing performance. In this study, we conducted the observed variables of intellectual capital, or the dimensions, are internal capital, external capital, and human capital. And for the performance construct, there were three dimensions or observed variables: effectiveness, efficiency, and reputation. For each observed variable, there was a set of questions. So in this study that we conducted, we used a questionnaire. We introduced the questionnaire with the instructions to the respondents. This study looked at the intellectual capital management in the public sector organizations for performance, and we looked at effectiveness, efficiency, and reputation. This questionnaire had responses, and the responses were elicited from a Likert scale. And the Likert scale here did not have no response or no category. It is because that this questionnaire was pilot tested to ensure that all questions that were asked were relevant to the respondents. So similarly, for the performance effectiveness, there was another set of questions, just like for intellectual capital, and all questions were in the same questionnaire but were under different parts. The questionnaire finally asks the demographic details of the respondent so that those information can be used as control variables. Finally, the respondent was asked to mention anything that was not noted in the questionnaire or any other comments or recommendations, so that those comments or recommendations could be included in the analysis. There are various ways that data errors could enter when measuring variables. To avoid data errors, there are certain precautions that questionnaire development can take. One is define the construct. Second is define the sample frame. Third is psychometrically assess the questions. Fourth, if theory suggests, see whether a causal relationship could be established. In this study that we conducted to minimize data errors, we defined the constructs. We defined the intellectual capital and performance, the two constructs. We defined the sampling frame, it was the Malaysian public sector. We developed a new questionnaire which were not previously psychometrically assessed. Therefore, we pilot tested the questionnaire for relevance to public sector. In this study, we did not look at the causal relationship, but instead we looked at the association between intellectual capital and